As you make your way through the various communities of Reddit, such as r/creepy encounters or r/confessions, you're bound to come across something that will either creep you out or leave you shaken. This is a collection of some of the strangest and darkest posts that you can find on Reddit. We'll start off with some of the lighter, creepy content, but a little later in the video, we'll get into the really dark stuff. Make sure to let me know if you like these types of videos by leaving a like, and if there are any other Reddit rabbit holes that you'd like to see me cover. The subreddit r/TIFU, an acronym for Today I F'd Up, is exactly what it sounds like. A place to share your personal stories in which in some way or another you made a big mistake. And user I Love Roach has a confession to make. He begins his post by writing the following. For as long as I can remember, I've had very intense fantasies about having relations with a giant roach. It started years ago when I read The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. As I delved deeper into the mind of the roach creature in the story, I began to imagine what it would be like if a woman were to transform into one. Instead of feeling repulsed or frightened as the characters in the story did, I found myself becoming aroused by the idea. I couldn't help but imagine taking care of her, nurturing her in her new form. Yeah, OP has some strange fantasies, but things aren't quite off the rails yet. He goes on to describe how his feelings for his fantasy roach woman developed into something much more intense. As I continued to think about this, my thoughts began to take a more intimate turn. I started to imagine an entirely new fictionalized species of roaches. Giant roaches, the size of a person, but with full intelligence. I even conjured up an imaginary friend of sorts, a roach named Ogtha. I would spend hours fantasizing about her, imagining elaborate scenarios of us making love. Inevitably, things would start to get complicated. When it came to real-life, intimate encounters, I Love Roach began to find that he couldn't perform unless he was thinking of Ogtha. So, every time he was with a woman, he would have to intently visualize that he was actually with her instead of the person he was with. This made the act less exciting, as I Love Roach is quoted saying, Ogtha's multiple appendages and antennae made for a touch that no human woman could ever match. Now, while Ogtha seems like a stand-up gal, and you can't argue with his logic about the appendages, it's clear that the author of this post has some very peculiar preferences that most people would not agree with, and frankly would find appalling. But soon, he would find himself in a relationship with a human female, and comfortable enough to confide something to her. And this is where the post takes a nosedive. For a year, I was in a relationship with my girlfriend, but I found myself unable to sleep with her without pretending she was Ogtha. I finally confided this to her, expecting her to be upset at first, but eventually getting used to it. However, her reaction was much stronger than I had anticipated. She was disgusted and outraged. She hasn't returned my texts since, and I fear that she may break up with me and tell others about my obsession with Ogtha. I feel guilty and ashamed, as if Ogtha will be saddened by my girlfriend's reaction, even though I know she's imaginary. I don't know what to do at this point. I fear my relationship is over and my reputation will be forever tarnished by my strange obsession with an imaginary roach. Unfortunately, there's no information on what eventually happened with this guy's relationship, as there were no updates to this thread. But judging from her reaction to what he confessed, it probably didn't work out as he had hoped. And I can't help but feel sorry for this guy in a way. He's just trying to let his freak flag fly. But maybe, just maybe, he found someone new. This disturbing post comes from the depths of the r/creepy encounters subreddit. It recounts a particularly concerning incident that occurred while a young woman with the Reddit username WolfDream was driving alone through a deserted stretch of Texas desert. I was driving from New Orleans to Eugene in my 14-foot U-Haul truck with my 2-year-old pit bull and everything I owned packed in the back. My only form of navigation was a flip phone and a printout of MapQuest directions. Cell phone service was spotty at best, and there were long stretches through the desert where I had zero service for hundreds of miles. As I was driving through central Texas, I realized I hadn't seen a town or an exit for a very long time, and my U-Haul was getting really low on gas. Just when I was starting to panic, I saw a small town coming up. I pulled off the highway and drove the short distance into town, and it was tiny, with only about 6 streets. I filled up my gas tank and was ready to get back on the road, but I couldn't seem to find my way out of the town. I circled around at least 4 times and was starting to get frustrated because it was such a small town and I couldn't find my way out. I could see the highway, but I couldn't get to it. Now, after several hours and nearly running out of gas, the OP finds herself seemingly lost in a small, unfamiliar town with no cell phone service, so she returns to the gas station to ask for directions. Inside, she finds a skinny, nondescript guy with greasy black hair. Strangely, the man never really meets her eyes and gives her directions that don't make sense, telling her to take a road that would lead her to the highway in 17 miles. She pointed out that there was no way she drove that far into town and she could see the highway from here. He dismissively replied that the road curved around and just to follow his directions. Something didn't seem right to her. Fear started to creep in, and it's evident from what she writes next. As soon as I stepped outside, my whole body started shaking and my heart was racing. I had a terrible feeling that this man had bad intentions. I got into my truck and burst into tears, knowing that I couldn't follow his directions. With the possibility that this man could have sinister motives, and being a woman alone in an unfamiliar place, she wasn't about to take directions from a shady man she knows are wrong. But the post continues, and we find out that there might just be good people out there after all. Just when I was about to give up, a big red truck pulled up and a friendly Texan man got out. He could see that I was upset and he offered to give me directions. I told him that I just couldn't seem to find the highway, and he cheerfully gave me directions for a hairpin turnoff that was just a quarter mile away. The way the man from the gas station had told me to go led away from town, away from the interstate, and led to seemingly the middle of nowhere. Texas told me that the road did go about 17 miles, right before it dead-ended in the desert. I asked him what was out there, and he told me that it was nothing but some junked cars and a few trailers and mobile homes, all owned by the same family. This family was known locally as troublemakers, druggies, and alcoholics, and these were the nice things that the townspeople had to say about them. And the gas station clerk was part of this family and lived down that same road. I'll never forget the look in Texas's eyes as he told me this. He also told me that I was smart to listen to my instincts, and he told me to be careful traveling out there. Thankfully, OP ran into this friendly man who was able to guide her to the highway and out of town. But the thoughts of what could have happened had she taken the direction she was first given still haunt her to this day. She writes towards the end of her post, "I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a place out of the Twilight Zone and that I had narrowly escaped a dangerous situation. From then on, I always trusted my instincts and never hesitated to ask for help if I felt something was off." We all have things we've done that we aren't proud of, some things worse than others. Sometimes the weight on your shoulders can be too much to bear, and the subreddit r/confessions can be a place where someone can get it all off their chest and still remain anonymous. Once in a while, a confession comes along that you may never forget, much like this one from Redditor Mesk997. It was 4 years ago when I first delved into the world of the dark net as a vendor. At the time, I was simply looking for an easy way to make money without having to conform to a traditional 9-to-5 job. I had been using for years and had built connections within the dealing scene. so I figured it would be a natural progression to start dealing myself. However, my anxiety made the idea of meeting with people in parking lots unappealing, and I didn't want anyone to know where I lived. That's when I came across the Silk Road and the story of Ross Ulbricht's capture. I became obsessed with the idea of creating my own darknet store and learning about operational security. After a few months, I finally launched my store, offering K, crystal, and some outdoor green from a Bruddy at a cheap price. Everything was going well for a few months, until I suffered a setback when a couple $1,000s was stolen in an exit scam. But I had saved about 25 grand by that point, so it didn't ruin my life like it had for other vendors. It was then that I met a local connect who came to town once a week, but could supply me with anything I wanted, including Mesk, Sid, and even Fent. I organized all of my customer information, including their names, addresses, and order information, in an Excel spreadsheet. However, due to a mistake on my part, I accidentally sent out Fent instead of Mesk to 7 customers. After a few days, I received a message from someone whose friend had died from my Mesk. When I checked my order log and inventory, I realized what had happened. I immediately deactivated my vendor account, sold the rest of my supply, converted my Bitcoin to cash, and moved away to a new city where I got a job at a restaurant. I haven't touched drugs or been involved in that lifestyle since that day, but the guilt of what happened weighs heavily on me. I still think about my customers every night, and I know that I'm responsible for the deaths of several people. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for my actions, and I struggle with feeling like I don't deserve to be alive. I spend my days working and coming home to play video games, and have become a recluse as people have distanced themselves from me. I'm not sure if I could even bring myself to tell a therapist about this, but maybe putting it into words will help me come to terms with what I've done. Gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse where an individual manipulates another person into doubting their own sanity. In a situation like this, it can be difficult to know what to do, as the person experiencing gaslighting may feel like they're going crazy. The OP of the following post suspects his wife is gaslighting him and reaches out to the r/relationships subreddit for help. This post would enthrall Redditors with its unexpected developments and even inspire its own subreddit r/betterhoagiedown. OP begins the post by sharing how hopeless he feels and that he has no idea what to do. I'm a 32-year-old male. I've been with my wife for the past 6 years. I believe she's gaslighting me and I don't know what to do. First and foremost, yes, I know this sounds ridiculous, and this will probably get downvoted as a troll post, but I sincerely don't know where to turn. I've never experienced anything like this. OP goes on to explain that leading up to this, his wife and him had watched Battlestar Galactica over Christmas and had a disagreement over the ending, with the wife feeling it ruined the entire show and he finding it consistent with the show's themes. The disagreement led to an argument and to the wife sleeping on the couch. The next day, OP had to leave for a business trip, and his wife barely responded to him when he said goodbye and didn't respond at all when he said he loved her. At the time, he didn't really think too much about it, but when he came back from the business trip, his wife continued behaving strange and distant. She had a class at the gym that she couldn't miss and would not skip it to pick him up from the airport. The next morning when he woke up, she was already awake and busy in the kitchen, which was unusual for her. And this is when things start to get weird. When OP was about to leave, she handed him a brown bag lunch, which she had never done before, and said, "It's cold out there, better hoagie down." She then immediately walked to the bathroom and slammed the door, refusing to come out or even respond. Already late for work and with his wife refusing to respond, he has no choice but to leave. But the concern and confusion he's experiencing is explained well later in the thread. Every morning this week, same exact thing. Wife is up, won't speak to me, hands me a brown bag lunch and says, "It's cold out there, better hoagie down." Walks to the bathroom, slams the door. This morning I had enough and yelled at her through the door, pleaded with her to stop, but she didn't say a thing. Every night it's been the same thing. Didn't happen. What are you talking about? You're being crazy. None of this is happening. She's been legitimately angry with me, and for the last few nights we haven't been sleeping together. I even heard her talking to her mother about this on the phone. I seriously have no idea what to do. I brought up couples counseling and she was incredulous. Is this some weird Twitter thing or new meme that I don't know about? Even if it is, she's taken this way too far. I don't know how I'm gonna spend the weekend at home with her. Does anyone have any advice? This whole situation is undoubtedly strange, and OP is really starting to feel the strain mentally. But this story gets weirder when the OP posts a couple of updates. Update. Woke up an hour ago with a huge headache. Went to the fridge to get a protein smoothie and saw that it had been cleared of what little food we had in there, and wife was not in the house. Got dressed and went to the door with the intent of going to get some food. Saw a brown paper bag with "It's cold out there, better hoagie down" written in cursive taped to the door. When I opened the bag, there was a can of ginger ale. Naturally, Redditors were on the edge of their seats, waiting to hear back from OP, offering their support for him as he deals with this apparent mental abuse by his wife. And soon enough, an update would come that would give the conclusion to this wild story a twist that nobody saw coming. I'm currently sedated, but I wanted to post this update because I don't know when I'll have a chance to next. The short of it is that my wife was not at fault here. I was. I took too much Benadryl to help me sleep through the night and ended up taking my wife's Seroquel by mistake, which caused me to have a manic episode. I went to my in-laws' house and they reported me to the authorities. I was taken to the hospital and given Ativan to sleep. The doctors believe that the Seroquel either put me into a manic state or triggered some underlying mental illness. While I was out, my wife contacted my parents. Apparently my grandfather had a mean temper and suffered delusions from time to time, rambling about things that didn't make any sense and waking up at weird hours to do God knows what. He never got a diagnosis and died fairly young, but my mother and her family think it might have been schizophrenia. So maybe something, maybe nothing. Who knows? Right now, I'm sitting in the hospital and the doctor and my wife are throwing around a number of ideas. I'm going to see a psychiatrist who's going to make a determination about what the next step is for sure. I have no idea where I came up with the phrase "hoagie down." I was listening to a radio show that mentions hoagies in Philly a lot. Maybe that's where I got it. So basically, turns out I'm going crazy, getting treatment now. Sorry if I wasted everyone's time. The subreddit r/AskReddit is among one of the most popular. The questions asked can range from absurd and hilarious to deep and thought-evoking. From time to time, you'll also come across some dark questions and some dark answers. This story comes from Redditor TA in response to a question on r/AskReddit, asking Redditors who had taken a life in self-defense what it was like to live knowing what you did. describes a horrific ordeal that happened to him and his family several years ago in San Francisco. Back in 1995, I lived in a quiet neighborhood in the San Francisco East Bay with my wife of a few years and our 20-month-old daughter. We had a small 3-bedroom, 2-story house, and one of our second-floor bedrooms doubled as my home office. One quiet Saturday morning, I was in my office playing Command & Conquer on my computer with my headphones on, oblivious to the sounds of the outside world. I'd probably been playing for an hour or so when, during one particularly quiet moment, I faintly heard my wife cry out downstairs. Knowing that she was down there with our daughter, I pulled my headphones off to see if she needed help with anything. Until the day that I take my last breath, I'll never forget what I heard when I pulled them off. I heard the voice of a man with a thick Mexican accent shout, "Quit yelling, bitch, or I'll cut your head off." This is when OP claims that it was like a switch was thrown in his head and his higher brain just shut off. He wasn't making decisions, he was simply acting. He pulled the .45 from his lockbox that he kept on his desk and started walking down the stairs slowly, terrified that he would find his wife dead at the bottom. Instead, what he saw was a large burly man wielding a knife and currently in the act of violating his wife. He goes on to explain what happens next. "I never said a word to the guy, not while I was upstairs, not while I was coming down the stairs, and not when I walked into the room. His back was to me, so he had no idea I was even standing there. He was holding his knife in his right hand, so that was the arm I grabbed with my left when I pulled him off. He spun away from her and towards me with a confused look on his face, and I shot him, square in the chest at nearly point-blank range, before he had a chance to say a single word. His face went pale as he went onto one knee, and I fired twice more. One hit his neck, and the second missed entirely. I was told later that the first shot was the fatal one." What happened next has always been a point of shame for me. The only thought going through my head at that point was that I couldn't let my daughter watch this man die. Without even checking on my wife, I scooped my daughter up and walked out my front door. As I walked out to my driveway, I saw one of my neighbors standing there and staring at my house. He'd heard the gunshots. The poor guy went pale when he saw me walk out, and I vaguely remember asking him to hold my daughter while I went and checked on my wife. The neighbor asked me if I'd shot her, and I told him no, I shot the man who was attacking her. I didn't realize at the time that I had the guy's blood spray covering half my body, and that I looked like something out of a horror movie. The police and district attorneys would end up giving Aim True some flack about the exact circumstances of the shooting, with some claiming it was more of an execution than a defense, but in the end they declined to pursue any charges. It turns out the man who attacked his wife turned out to be someone with serious mental illness issues who had previously convicted of 2 similar attacks, one of which was against a young girl. As California had recently implemented the 3 strikes law, the attacker would have faced life in prison. I'd like to thank you if you stuck around this long. I really enjoyed making this video, and there are many more strange and disturbing Reddit rabbit holes to dive down, so if you enjoyed this one, consider subscribing, and please let me know if you'd like to see more of these types of videos in the comments. Stay safe out there.